Father, Lord God, we're grateful for this morning, and we're grateful for the opportunity to think strategically about ministering and leading teenagers well. God, we ask that you would guide this conversation, Lord, and that you would equip us, challenge us, but encourage us through this process, Lord. And so, Father, Lord, we thank you for Chris, we thank you for Seth, and we thank you for all of our student ministers across South Carolina that are ministering well to students and just care about them and their parents, Lord. So, Lord, Father, we lift this up to you, and we pray this in the name of Jesus and in faith. Amen.
Amen. Well, we appreciate you guys jumping on with us today. We do want to kind of move a little quick because we want to leave some time for you guys to just kind of pick both Seth and Chris's brain about the pandemic, about what's going on. But I think one thing for us to remember is there really a right answer? I think every situation is going to be different. Every opinion is going to be different because all of our pastors are different. They're different in the way they lead and the way that they give us freedom or don't give us freedom. So today, the conversation, my heart behind it is just to hear from these two guys. Like Bryant said, I work with Seth. Seth is my boss, but Seth is full of wisdom. Chris, I've met several times. We've hung out many times. And he is at a great church down in Atlanta. So we just want you guys to be able to pick their brains. We want you guys to feel the freedom to ask a bunch of questions. If we're getting a bunch of questions in, we want you guys to, or maybe we can just pause with these pre-questions and get to what is really on your guys' hearts today. That's what we want this time to be, is a resource for you. So I'm going to start it off. And Chris, I get to hear Seth a lot, so I want you to start off with the first one. So the question is how has the COVID-19 pandemic challenged or refined the way you approach ministry? So how is it different for you guys down at Johnson's Ferry? And maybe how's it the same?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the fact is that if there's ever been a time where I'm in a training type situation like I'm in right now, that has caused me to feel like unprepared and questioning why I'm on this panel, it would be this one, because clearly none of us have any experience with what we're all going through. And honestly, like across the board, like the several pages here that I'm looking at, like the 44 folks that are on this call, I mean, we're all going through this at the same time, right? And we're all struggling. There's a whole lot of similarities that we're all experiencing. And then there's a whole lot of things that are unique to context. If you're in rural South Carolina, or if you're in more of a city, suburb type place. If you have, 100 people at your church, getting started again might be easier than if you have 2,000 people at your church. Like there's so many layers to this thing. But I can tell you this, like the one thing that's been haunting me over and over again in a good way, has been that this whole thing has been very clarifying and revealing to what we're doing, both as a church, like on a macro level, but also even from a student ministry, as you start to filter that thing down, it's been very, very revealing of the things that are healthy that we're doing and the things that are not healthy. So an example would be like when you think of our small groups, our life groups, the groups that were healthy have really not missed the beat. They're still going strong. They jumped right in Zoom calls, and that's my daughter's group. She's got a great leader. She's a 10th grade, and she's got a great leader, and they're doing what they always do. They're doing great. The leaders that are sort of duds, not that any of y'all have leaders that are duds, right? Those are the groups that are struggling. So it's been very revealing, if you will, very clarifying, So I think that's been the real challenge, because ultimately for us, like for y'all as well, all of our gimmicks, all of our flash, all of that stuff, it's just not going to be enough. How do we connect with kids? That's the ultimate. How do we keep connecting with teenagers? How do we connect with teenagers? How do we connect with, and honestly, 20 minutes ago, I hung up with my student staff on a Zoom call where we're wrestling with that same thing because we feel like our kids have Zoom fatigue. On Wednesday nights, our numbers are just slowly, I say slowly, over the course of 4 weeks, have started up. Woo! Now they're, half of what they were, honestly. So, so it's definitely challenging for us.
Let me jump in on that and say, one of the things in youth ministry, some of you guys are maybe you've been in your church maybe a year or so. Some of you may have been there several years, and you see some things that don't work well, but they're expected to be done. And like you have this pressure coming at you that you've got to do these things. And all of a sudden, while I in no way do I believe this pandemic came from God, I do believe that God is using this to allow us to rethink why we do what we do, and for parents and adults to all of a sudden see, gosh, we thought that tradition was so important, but maybe that's not so important. This is an opportunity for all of us to reevaluate some things. Even going into the summer. And just a quick note, let me encourage, if you're not speaking, if you could mute your microphone, that would be a big help, just so it doesn't cause conflict. If you would mute your microphone, that'd be a big help.
Seth acting like he's in youth group, just getting on to you guys.
Yeah, I have to do that. I said, coming back.
Hey, stop changing your backgrounds. Hey, mute your microphone.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm just saying.
Go ahead, Papa Seth.
I keep waiting for the virtual backgrounds to start popping up. But I guess for me, in our ministry, that's kind of one of the things that's happening is that there's so much going on, and all of a sudden everything's put on pause, and so you get to ask the question, okay, when this thing lifts, whenever it is, do we hit resume, okay, or do we hit refresh, or do we hit reboot, okay? Do you just kind of change it up a little bit, or do you just kind of just start from scratch? And just let me remind you guys, in youth ministry, we got to remember it's three parts. It's youth workers, and parents. And so during this journey we're on, we have to think about those three sets of voices speaking into this opportunity that I think God has given us. That is, I almost said the word unprecedented, and I did just now because I'm sick of it. But because everybody's saying
these are challenging times, Seth. These are challenging times. But what you need to do is you just need to pivot. You need to pivot.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead. My bad.
Yeah, I like to pivot. No, that was good.
Sorry.
and Jimmy's saying we're all in this together. Nobody starts saying that.
Hey,
please.
and Jimmy, listen, man, and we're gonna come out of this thing. All right, Jimmy, we're gonna come out of this. All right. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
And we'll be stronger.
And we're gonna be stronger. We are gonna be stronger.
All right. Let me say this. And
people are gonna start dropping out like flies, right? They're like, oh, this is not yet.
Several weeks ago, Craig Groeschel in his leadership podcast, he made a statement: crisis creates clarity. Crisis creates clarity. And referencing back to what I was saying about our parents and youth workers, I posted a site there, Christianity Today. Kara Powell, she's one of the professors out at Fuller, and she's a great read. But one of the things she talks about is during this time, there's a tendency to look and see what somebody else is going to do, and like, okay, then we're going to do that. Well, it needs to be unique to your situation, and let your parents and let your youth workers and your students speak into that. And that's what I would say.
Yeah. So going along with that is, what are the strategies, your methods, your programming? What are the challenges when we get back from health standpoint, from social distancing, from all that good stuff, logistical challenges? Let's see, what are the biggest things that you guys are thinking through as a youth minister, as both of you guys are dads, What are some things that you're thinking through as far as we, we don't know? Like, I know our church is putting a plan together, and it's a lot of ifs. So if this happens, then what? So what are you guys thinking as far as your ministry going forward from now? What are the biggest challenges? What are your thoughts?
Chris, you go ahead and I'll follow up. I'm gonna post an article while you're doing that.
Yeah. Well, it hit. We had a. Let me write even more. Yesterday, we posted our steps going forward to regathering at Johnson Ferry, and so we went official with that, and as a church as a whole. And last week, really a week and a half ago, I guess it was more like a week and a half ago, it hit me hard that just getting worship going again is going to be a beast for our church. And it became, there was a moment in that meeting, I got invited to this meeting where it was like our executive staff plus other key staff to talk about how do we get this thing going again. I realized for the first time, I was like, oh, it's hitting me now that really what's about to happen is it's going to be really hard just getting worship going using multiple venues, because we had done the math on how many people we could potentially have on our campus including the student centers and all that. And it became very obvious to me that I've got to change my thinking on this. It's not going to be like whenever we're using words like we're going to meet again together, we're not talking about everything meeting, at least at Johnson Ferry. We're just talking about getting people together for worship. So for me, that meant I had to rethink, okay, so getting back into this thing is going to be a slower process for the student ministry than it is for the church, and I have to change my thinking to be very kingdom minded in that sense, and not just think about our students, but also think about how do we impact the whole thing. So that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how does that impact from it's going to be a little while. It's going to be a little while longer. Matter of fact, to be real, just to give you actual numbers or dates or whatever, I think it's going to be August before we are meeting officially as life groups again, like our Sunday morning programming or Wednesday night programming. It'll be because the steps that we put into place, and we're using the word steps very intentional, not phases, because we didn't want to confuse that with what the government's saying. Just the steps for us getting back together. That doesn't include us getting together as students or children or preschool or any of those things. That's just getting us in the building to worship together. So it's going to be a little bit. Seth, what are you thinking?
Yeah, one of the things that we kind of launched out and have done a little bit of investigative work on, that it looks like it's going to be an option, that it's the outdoor venues. Because I agree with Chris. I think the indoor, the things they'll be working against us. And guys, everybody here, we all have different kind of takes on what's happening, all the way from, this is so been blown out of proportion, and to, some are, you washed your hands even before you got on your computer because you were afraid of, and that's okay. I'm saying we're all extremes here. And because of that, our people are just like that. And so if we're looking at what that next looks like at an possible outdoor venue for our students or our people. And, but just because we say that, not everybody's going to come. Now, people are talking about, man, I miss worship. I miss youth group. I miss the hang time together. And so that's a precious thing. I think it's a beautiful thing to hear people yearning for that and longing for that. But the steps in doing that, I think right now for us is trying to make sure we're staying connected with our students, through the Zoom calls. I will say this, just a reminder that, this really accentuates the importance of Ephesians 4:11 and 12. to equip the saints for the work of ministry, you have got to empower your youth workers to connect with your students. This can't be on you. Okay, you've got to love on your youth ministry team, and but really help them feel the weight of, hey, listen, that these kids in your class, I need you to help us reach them and stay connected with them and follow up with them, how they're doing. Y'all, the mental health challenges that we're going to see are only going to escalate. We're going to see, there was just I guess it was last week, there was a teenager that committed suicide in the Midlands that we found out about. And my fear is that the isolation and some of these other challenges, milestones not being honored. I just posted something about, graduation, all these different things that students are beginning to struggle with. They grasp the weight of that. Going forward, how do we continue to nurture that? And then when they come back, how do we allow for them to process that? It can't be same old, same old. It's kind of like when World War II happened. Not that I was alive then. Somebody, I was waiting. Jacob Comer probably would say something that I was alive in World War II. But that was a defining moment. And then the atom bomb. When that was dropped, it kind of everybody lived in fear of what era are we walking into. You can fast forward to different times in history that for the next 10 years, it changed everything culturally. Well, it's going to impact us even to the point of some people will only want to worship at their computer at home. That's going to happen for months. And so our students they're part of those families. And so we can't guilt them into going, hey guys, come on, we've got hand sanitizers at the door and we've got masks for you. So we've got to reach them where they are. And I think going back to what Jacob said earlier, right at the very beginning, this is unique to your area. And you
Seth,
just
I think you're starting to touch on something that I think is important too, like related to what Jacob asked, which is what are we thinking about going forward? And I would encourage, if there is a moment where I would encourage everybody in this, it would be to start to say, in your context, what are you learning from this that will change things going forward in a good way? There's a whole lot of stuff that's not fun in this, right? We all get that. If we say, hey, Pat Gillen is texting me privately stuff like just mean stuff. Pat, cut it out. Okay. So, and also I have ADD, Pat. So like, cut it out. I can't focus on what I'm going to say if you're texting me stuff. All right. So that said, I think for all of us just to really start thinking about what's the good out of this? And a couple examples that you're starting to touch on, Seth, which is, yeah, kids are wanting to stay home, but on the flip side of that, well, Sunday night, we had a deacons meeting, a Zoom deacons meeting, and we had 167 deacons. Now it was very much a lot of this stuff right here, a lot of this stuff happening. It was a mess, but we had 167 deacons show up to this. It was the most deacons we'd ever had at a meeting. And, but here's what's interesting. I personally love that meeting so much because at 4:30, I walked to my computer, turned it on, and at 5:30, I was done. Right? So it also made me go, you know what? At least for me, I've struggled doing youth worker training. That has been but it's also a real passion of mine to do training, right? So, but if I could say to a group of youth workers, hey, we're gonna have a training thing, and I'm bringing in Bryant Laird from South Carolina. He's gonna do this little training for my workers, but you don't have to come up to the church, which is going to equal an extra hour for you because you got to travel and get ready and all that stuff. You just need at 4:30 on Sunday night to just sign on for an hour. Well, that's going to be huge. Let's talk about our seniors for a minute. Talk about strategy changing going forward. Going forward, if all of a sudden we've said it, you mentioned Sticky Faith folks earlier, Seth, if they're right, that one of the major things we need to be doing with our seniors is saying to them, hey, after your senior year, we're going to still stay connected to you.
Yeah.
Well, all of this has changed that mindset. So across the street, I've got a guy who goes to my church as a youth worker that's connected with a bunch of college kids. Well, this is going to really open up the door to extend that senior ministry to that freshman year, where those kids are now kind of in a pattern where they could still meet with. So there's a lot of really good strategy things that could come out of this. That I think
Chris,
are gonna be awesome.
Chris, let me jump on what you said, because I want to mention this. And Chris and I were talking about this last week. Several years ago, I was sitting down with Richard Ross, and I always love to pick his brain, because I think he's kind of like not only the guru of youth ministry, but almost like a prophet of what's to come. And one of the few people in the world that I think has had a finger on the pulse of youth ministry for decades. And I asked him, I said, Richard, what's that thing that you see is the next in youth ministry? What do you feel like the next? He said, youth ministry should be through the freshman year of college. It should include in the job description of responsibility, it should include not just through their senior year in high school, but through their freshman year of college. And because the student minister knows them best, knows the challenges that they're facing, and when they're handed off to a great college minister, and yes, there can be a lot of transition work done, but at the end of the day, there's marker points and connection points made through that student's past that in our approach, let me say this, our approach is through our discipleship leaders doing this, because we're implementing this fall. Okay, we're kind of going hardcore on this fall, and this has set us up for that. How? Zoom. I mean, we've discovered now that we can hold our college freshmen, I don't want to say accountable, because they're not going to love that word, saying, hey, we're going to meet with you to hold you accountable. We're going to meet with you because we love you and we want to journey with you.
Well, Seth, another way to say it, the relationship doesn't have to end.
Yes.
That's
it's not a handing off. It's not,
hey, we don't have to be done. Now, you're a college kid now, but in the book, like we talk about it, in her book, they talk. I think I was in a training with them at one point. Imagine that freshman year, that first Friday night, that kid gets there, and they have to decide: am I going to go out and party like everybody else, or am I going to sit in my dorm room by myself? Now, it sounds kind of cheesy and lame, or am I going to jump on a Zoom call? Which is really not the full answer, we know, but there's something to that, though, that could help with all of that. That's a real win.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I was thinking of during this is we're really good at student pastors at, I guess, thinking constantly. Like Seth and I talk in the office a lot on, like, yes, we work these hours in the office, but some of our best ideas, some of our best emails come like after midnight to each other. Or, there's just sometimes when, our pastor shared with us yesterday in a meeting, like he just couldn't sleep the other night. The Lord was giving him something. And I feel like that happens to me a lot, like all the time when I'm up awake and I'm thinking about student ministry. I'm thinking about what we can do. I'm thinking about the next event, the next thing. But for a second, I'd love for you two to kind of not think about students for a second. I want to think of you yourselves as student pastors. How do you think this season has impacted us as student pastors? And what are the ways that we can take care of ourselves? So not thinking of students, but what are some things that maybe some disciplines that you put in your life to take care of yourself during this time? Because I think Seth and I talk, I don't normally talk to Chris a lot, but Seth and I talk all the time that sometimes I feel like we're engaging better with our students right now more frequently. We're seeing them, we're talking to them more because our normal programming is gone and we're having to kind of fight to do some new stuff. So sometimes in that kind of overworks ourselves. Sometimes working from home means, okay, I can get my computer out at 7 p.m. and do a few things as opposed to leaving it at work. So sorry, I just punched my computer. What are some ways that you guys, some disciplines that you put, maybe some boundaries that you put in your life to take care of yourself during this time?
I'd be curious real quick, Seth, like if I could ask a question real quick. I wonder if everybody could comment and chat real quick. If you could just answer this question, have you experienced more anxiety since this whole thing started as a youth pastor? And maybe you can just say yes, about the same, not really. Like, just curious, jump on chat and just give me a little feel for that.
Good.
And you don't have to answer like you think I want you to answer. I mean, be honest. I mean,
Wow.
so I feel like, so I can't speak for you. This is me. I feel like I'm just starting to settle down a little bit this week.
Dude.
Like it has been 6 weeks of, and my wife doesn't really normally worry about me a whole lot, but I mean, as far as just like her trying to get me to settle down, settle my brain down, you know what I'm saying? Because it's just like from the moment I wake up to the moment, even to the point where I like had to revert back to, I've got to make myself get up again in the morning. And before I turn anything on, I've got to get myself back back to the basics, if you will.
Yeah.
Of just spending an hour just reading the word, because it's been a lot. Like it's been a lot.
Chris, I want to dovetail off of what, because I appreciate you saying that, because for me, I will say that I feel like in some ways my stress level has risen through this, because I feel the weight of responsibility. And I think I'm saying the name right. Jean-Pierre just posted a few minutes ago the pressure to produce content. I don't want to say that that's what I felt, but the end result would be that. I mean, because I'm meaning, we have, parents we're trying to reach when we're doing Thursday night family devotions. We're doing the Crossfire Wednesday night that we're planning and putting together, and I could speak about our Wednesday night program later, the things that we've learned about that. But other Zoom calls that we're trying to do to connect with all of our students and empower our leaders, our staff Zoom calls. Then thinking about, my personal health, my family. Brian, I think you said something about your kids. I just walked through a wedding with my son. Life goes on, and so we're juggling life with our families, and all this has just added. I think Adam said it too a while ago. It's a different kind of pressure. It's a different kind of stress. I mean, listen, youth ministry. I'll tell you, I'm working more hours now than I've worked. It's almost like pre-camp week or pre-mission trip week.
Like it really does feel like that, Seth. Like it was, and Friday, and there is no like really off day.
No.
Like Friday off day, Friday, like it's just all, like just stays going.
Yeah, and of course people say, what do you do all day? What does a youth minister really do? And that's like, what, I don't know if I'm getting the answer to that. But I think that, Jacob, back to your point, this week I kind of tried to step back a little bit and see that I need, because this is a marathon we're in right now. This is not a sprint. And I think that's kind of what I'm figuring out, that while we're going to roll some things out in our church, there's still a lot of our small group ministry is not going to be meeting at the church. I mean, probability, the whole summer, that's not going to happen. Okay. Well, what did we learn in seminary or in training for, church, small groups is the lifeblood of the church. Okay. So we've got to make sure the small groups are still happening. And so, part of the reason why the small groups are important, because they minister. It's kind of like the care ministry to your people. Well, y'all, we need that too as youth ministers. And I think that's why Bryant is wisely putting these kinds of things together so that we can encourage each other and hold each other accountable, you know, and just checking on our families, checking on our health. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm exercise. You know, everybody's talking about, man, I've got all kind of time in the world to do this, that, and the other, and obviously I'm doing something wrong because I don't have all that time. I'm trying to find it, but anyway, I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think if there Jacob, to kind of answer your question about how we take care of them, though, I think it's one of those moments where, as youth pastors, it would be really healthy for all of us to practice what we've been teaching and preaching for how many ever years you've been doing youth ministry, and just do kind of a spiritual checkup, if you will. How are you doing on spending time in the Word every day? How are you doing? And I'm trying to be honest and say, I towards the end of last week, I was like, ouch, like I'm not doing great. I've let this slip a little bit because I'm constantly working for Jesus, right? So I must be good, right? I'm working for Jesus. So no, I wasn't. And I had to kind of hit restart earlier this week, and I think it's helping settle me down a little bit, you know? So,
you know, one of the things,
paying attention to those rhythms is just important. And
you know,
I'll say this too, because there's going to be a moment also where if you've been home for 6 weeks with your family, and if you have a date coming up soon where you're going to have to start going back to the office, I would recommend also that you start to think through how that's going to impact your home life, because your wife is potentially used to having you home and your rhythms have changed at home, especially if you have little ones. See, so for me, I've got like a college kid and a junior, or a sophomore. If you have an 8-year-old, or you have several kids, and all of a sudden you're going to start going back and putting time in the office. You're going to finally get that break. You're going to get to go back, right? But yet, that may end up actually causing some challenges for you as far as how that impacts your family. So you may want to start having conversations now about how that's going to impact your family, because it's coming. Like, it's going to come where all of a sudden, and they're going to still be feeling the stress of not being in school and not having a break and all those things while you get to go back to the office. So just keep that in mind.
One of the things, I was listening to a leadership podcast last week, or 2 weeks ago, and it was really a great reminder that every morning, you know, it's just really important to get up with a sense of mission, and take a shower, get up, get dressed, because it could be the kind of thing you get into a routine during this journey that when it's time to go back, it's going to be such a radical shift in a lot of ways for us. And for us here at First Baptist, we're not required to be in the office, okay? But our team, we talked about it, and we try to practice the social distancing thing and use care and caution and whatnot. But we found it important for our student ministry team. We're in the office on Mondays and Wednesdays, and it was a choice that we were given that opportunity. But for me personally, being able to come, I think to Chris's point, if you have that choice, you may want to begin to introduce at least a day a week that you're going to the office, if you're not doing that already. And to do a lot of your Zooms there at the office, that when you come home, you can kind of keep that, because one of the things I've tried to do for years, that when I get home, I try not to bring ministry home, although that's impossible in ministry. But one of the things the Zoom has done, what we're doing is we're having to do a lot of ministry from home. And while that's not all bad, it does change the dynamics of our home situation. And depending on where you are, this some things. I want to speak real quickly to something. Nathan Neighbors, love you, brother. I miss you, and I appreciate your comment, man, about the mental health, using folks in your church that may speak to that, and offering a helpline for your students. I saw that. That's a great idea. Deandra, some of y'all know Deandra, Jacob's wife, Deandra. She's a family therapist. She does counseling and stuff, and the calls for help are escalating. And that speaks back to what Chris and I were saying earlier, the mental health challenges as we go through this. And some of you guys may know this. There's a lot of the cyberbullying things have actually escalated. Pornography is they have said it's an 80% increase. Now, I don't know how they get those numbers, but when you talk about isolation, anxiety, stress, that's not a good chemistry set for a lot of our students who struggle anyway. And so, just some things going forward, trying to coach our students through, we practice social distancing. Unfortunately, some of them may be practicing spiritual distancing, and we've got to help them with that.
Yeah, let's move on. I want to do one more question and then kind of open it up to you guys to ask more questions. I know we've got a lot going in the chat. But one thing I just wanted us to hit, just as kind of a thing, for a resource for everyone on the call, because we're, like I said at the beginning, we're all different. Our churches look different. Our staff dynamics look different. Maybe you're at a church where it's you and your senior pastor and y'all are the senior leadership. Maybe you're at a church where there's 5 or 6 guys on an executive team, whatever. But Seth and Chris, how do you distinguish between your student ministry decisions and your church-wide decisions? So as you look towards whether or not to cancel summer camp, or whether or not to do Sunday school, how do you distinguish between those two? Like, do you follow suit on everything? Do you try? I know for us personally, I know Seth will probably share about this. We're still holding hope that we can do our mission trip, and day by day it's looking slimmer and slimmer, but we're not giving up yet. So kind of give us some guidance on your opinions on that. When do you fold? What's that song? No wind to hold. No.
Oh, wow. You just went old school, baby. Kenny Rogers, man.
Yeah. Talk about what is that song? If you
The Gambler.
Quote that song if you don't know what that song is, Jacob. Sheesh. Kenny Rogers, he just passed away too, man. You're walking on his grave. Cut it out.
Let me speak to it, because I think in some ways Chris is, in Georgia, it's going to be a little bit different from what they're dealing with. And then Chris, you can jump in.
We're all hanging out in Georgia already, man. We're already
back home. Hey, we're going to come down to Waffle. Hey, we're coming to Waffle House. Like I said, we're going to come down to Waffle House and sit down and have a real meal.
We're really not, but
like some people I know. But anyway, one of the things for us right now, I was our big mission trip is in Kentucky, and the governor of Kentucky is not our friend right now. He is making some decisions that's making it problematic for us in a lot of ways, and for the churches in Kentucky. I'm not sure if you're on that, but the Attorney General's already written a pretty stirring statement against that, and so that could impact us in a huge way. But nevertheless, as every week goes by, we're looking at what's happening. June, we've pretty much realized that June is shot for us to go somewhere. Because if you're traveling across state lines, then you've got to realize you're in the jurisdiction of those states. And if you're transporting students and in proximity, you've got to honor the states that you're going through and going to. And so that's going to impact that decision. We're looking at July right now and of course, our big back to school thing is the end of July, first weekend in August. And we're still full tilt on that, understanding, and I'll just go ahead and say this. Not everybody would be excited about that and say, hey, we're going, we're going on this, whatever. We're already preparing to take 50% on our mission trip. We realize that from a financial standpoint, from a parent saying there's no way that I'm allowing my kid to go, that's going to impact. But our church is pretty much, for the most part, we feel like we need to be in line with what the big church here, in line with them. But we're also given a little bit of latitude, and that's why we're working on some outdoor venues to meet at some point. And the governor kind of opened the door on that for us yesterday. That we can do some outdoor gathering, but you have to practice social distancing, and they're not going to come down on the worship gathering experiences. Y'all may not know this, but in Kentucky, you can't even do a drive-in church. I mean, the people in Kentucky, Maryville Baptist Church, they were ordered to quarantine for 14 days because they attended a drive-in church, stayed in their cars, and they've been ordered to quarantine. I mean, so that's what they're dealing with in Kentucky. We have a governor here that, fortunately, is for the faith community, and I think it's really important.
Jacob, I'd like to drill down just a little bit on one thing you're asking there also that I think is important for all of us in our student ministry positions, and that's to kind of help lead the way to be unified as a staff and to be unified as a church instead of just thinking our student ministry only. Keep it in mind that any type of announcements that we make, if you make an announcement that you're going to cancel camp, and it happens to be the same within a week or two of VBS, that decision's going to automatically, potentially, imply that VBS is also canceled. So you're going to want to communicate with your children's person to make sure that you're not outing them on a decision before they're ready. Because one thing I think it's important that we do is that when we do make things official, that we go ahead and try to answer as many questions with that decision as possible. Hey, we're canceling this mission trip, and here are the answers that this is the questions we think that's automatically going to come up on your radar. Am I getting a refund? Is there going to be another alternative? All those things, right? So keep it in mind that any decisions that we make about gathering, it's going to potentially lead them to think of another area, because you have kids in your group. You have parents in your group that have a kid in your student ministry, but they still have a third grader as well. So you just want to, so what I've been trying to practice just to be a good staff team member is to communicate with the other people and just say, hey, we're about ready to promote this. Are you cool with that? We're about to let everybody know that this is what we're doing. We had to cancel a couple mission trips. We had to cancel a big trip we do with our middle school students to Dallas, Texas, the first week of June. And at that same week, our high school choir was headed to Poland this year for a trip they do ever so often. And we wanted to sync up on that as to not, because if I cancel Dallas, obviously it's probably going to mean that Poland's canceled as well. So I would just recommend that you really try to do and request that as well. Like at next, if you're in a meeting, just make sure that you're kind of on the same page there, because often those decisions impact other ministries for you as well. Does that make sense, Jacob?
It's truly a domino. Yeah, it's truly a domino effect. Yeah, if you make a decision in isolation, it actually can
you just can't. It's just not help. Here's the thing, and it's an opportunity for you to really help. So many times as student pastors, we're like, man, I wish I had a seat at the table. Well, this is the time that we can really lead up in a way and help everybody to understand this. And keep in mind that your pastor, to be fair to our pastors, I cannot imagine what this is like for them and what they're going through.
Yeah,
that's good.
I mean, good grief. I mean, we're struggling with what we're doing student ministry. Can you imagine leading the whole church and worrying about we're worried about budget, but they're worried about the budget. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many layers to this thing. So they might be a little preoccupied with just overall how to get people back in the doors. Yeah. So again, I just can't recommend enough that you really try to lead well, communicate well, and think through potential implications to anything you say out loud.
Yeah, I think
I know we're.
Go ahead, Seth.
Well, I was just say I was looking at the clock, and I know that we're closing in quick. I wanted to throw something out to everybody, just kind of as as we're making decisions for the summer and evaluating what we're doing now and doing well, and some things, the Zoom calls, trying to retain uh, attendance. One of the things that Chris and I were talking about, I guess it was a week or two ago, was think about using a special guest or somebody that you might know to come in on a Zoom call, so that there's a different voice that can help get some traction. It could be somebody from your community that everybody knows. It could be a former connection that you have, that when the students find out they're going to be on Zoom, it might pique an interest. Another thing, I would encourage you, a lot of your families, they hear the term family devotion. We have been pleasantly surprised at the number of families that dial in every Thursday night for family devotion. And it's a meaningful experience that we have one of our families that leads the worship. We have some other people that will pray and possibly lead the Bible study, or I'll lead it, or Jacob leads it. And I think it's a way that you can connect with your families, but especially your parents, that's in a special way, because you can actually guide some of that conversation through this summer. And that's something that just strengthens the whole body. So a lot of the decisions we have will kind of come out of those informal settings, because you'll hear comments from parents. I mean, we had people say yesterday, we can't wait to come back. We can't wait to come back. Well, we get that. And we, right now, we really can't control that. We don't control that. But when that time comes, it is going to look differently. And I know all of you, I sent a link to a pretty lengthy PDF that I encourage you to read through. It's for faith communities, some of the safeguards and things coming back. But, we need to make sure that we're constantly letting our people know that we're taking every safeguard, every measure, and that we're going to, and that you have some people with you in that decision. Make sure that it's not on you. Make sure that when you make those announcements, hey, our Open the Gates team has come up with a strategy for allowing student ministry to start back. We've been given approval from the pastor, and here's what we're doing going forward. Make sure that rolling it out or whatever is done as part of a team of people, and it's not you declaring this.